Excellent. Good. Well, Erev Tov, everybody. Good to see you all tonight as we begin the first in our series of some Elul classes to get us ready for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And tonight, we're going to be talking a bit about the shofar, as everybody, I hope everybody knows. If so, you've come to the right place. If not, we'll try to make this the right place for you. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is a little bit about sort of the meaning of the shofar and the origin of the shofar, and also some of the how-tos, how to blow a shofar as well. And something we'll also address this a little bit too, and something we're really encouraging this year, and I know we already have some shofar blowers on the call, but this is we will be blowing shofar, of course, in our services. And God willing, we're planning on blowing them at Tashlich services on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and also have a couple other opportunities as well for people to come and hear the shofar live. But this year is a good year. If you don't have a shofar, if you're getting a shofar, to learn how to blow the shofar so you can sound it in your own homes and be able to do that mitzvah. And we hope that some of what we're going to talk about today is going to help you do that. In terms of where to get your shofar. Funny story. So we had all sorts of great ideas about where we could help people get a shofar. We contacted some people who could maybe do a TBS order, and we reached out to people in Israel, and we talked to the gift shop at TBS about where the best place is to get a shofar, how we can facilitate for people. And at the end of the day, guess where we found is the best place to send people to get their very own shofar in a timely manner before Rosh Hashanah?
The gift shop.
By Amazon.
Amazon.com. Amazon.com, ladies and gentlemen. Believe it or not, we did try the gift shop, but they have shofar too, and they come very quickly, and they're rather affordable, and you can find some good ones. So if you need a consult on one you're looking at, too, if you're thinking about getting your own, we can help with that too. Anyway, I wanted to start, and I'm going to share my screen here. Second, there we go.
How many people are on?
What was that, Alex?
I didn't say anything.
So I want to share my screen here and begin at one of the beginning verses where we learn about the shofar in the Torah, and to think about together what this verse is saying about the shofar, and to think about what the shofar evokes for us. So we have from the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, it says, the Be'al B'nai Israel, you proof these things, and you proof these things, and you proof these things, and then it's still Leviticus. Anyway, the Be'al B'nai Israel, more speak to the Israelite people, B'chodesh hashvi'i b'echad l'chodesh, in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, Yeh lechem Shabbaton, it'll be a day of complete rest. Zichron Trua Mikre Kodesh, a remembrance of the shofar blast on a holy occasion, right? Zichron Trua. So this verse is talking about Rosh Hashanah. And what are the words that jump out at you here that this verse uses to describe Rosh Hashanah? And you can, as we've learned to do, virtually raise your hand or wave at me, or, we're not such a huge group tonight. If you want to start talking, we can try to do that too. But what words jump out at you here at this verse that describe Rosh Hashanah, that connect to it? Alvin?
Well, the Shabbaton, because we always refer to Yom Kippur as Shabbaton, and we don't usually talk about Rosh Hashanah in the terms of Shabbaton. It's on the same level as the pilgrimage holidays, and they're not referred to as Shabbaton either. So it's an unusual place to put the word Shabbaton. Good.
That's true. It is an unusual place for Shabbaton, but it certainly does, kind of let us know that it is a day of rest. As Alvin said correctly, it's a day of rest like the other Chagim, those being Sukkot, Shavuot, and Passover. But here it uses that word Shabbaton. Good. Who else? Paul?
Well, it says remembrance of the shofar blast. It says nothing about actually sounding the shofar.
Good, right? So it says Zichron Trua in the Hebrew, right? This remembrance of a shofar blast, which one might read and think, oh, so we recall shofar blasts of old on this day. But of course, we know the sounding the shofar, really hearing the shofar, shofar is going to become one of the central mitzvahs of Rosh Hashanah. And I want to come back to that idea of zichron trua, that remembrance of the shofar blast too. Good.
Well, at the risk of jumping what you were going to say later, Rabbi, the zichron trua are the words that we say when the first day of Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbat, like it is this year, because we aren't going to hear the shofar. We have to recall the sound of it.
Good, right? So one could read it. I don't think the Talmud does this, but one could read it as as a proof to say, well, or as an explanation really to say how we don't sound the shofar on Shabbat, which the reason why we don't sound the shofar on Shabbat is because we don't want people to break Shabbat by carrying it to the synagogue for the shofar, is what the Talmud says. But when we don't hear the shofar on Shabbat, like it will be this year on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we remember the shofar blast, right? We still have shofar wrote in the Musaf Amidah, for example, that talk about the shofar blast and other places where it comes up, and it's still something that is very much on our minds on Rosh Hashanah, even when we don't sound it. Good. Let's do one more. Julie.
So it ends with the word kadosh, or holy. And again, my Hebrew isn't as strong, but I thought that was almost to make holy, almost future tense that comes before it. So that the act of observing it and the shofar will make it holy.
So actually, it's the word there is kodesh, which is a noun. How it's used there, right? As sort of
but the mikra before it, but I might be wrong. But the idea of just still making holy.
Yeah, it's more like you're calling it holy, right? Or like calling it a holy, holy occasion there. But it certainly does speak to the holiness of the day, and it seems to connect the sounding of the shofar to holiness, right? There's something holy about sounding that shofar. Perhaps the sounding of the shofar is what helps make the day holy, right? That we hear it at that moment. Good. So we have here a number of things we've identified in this verse, and what I do really want to zero in on, is this idea of zichron trua, this remembrance of a shofar blast, because I think that, I know certainly for me as I reflect back on Rosh Hashanah's past. From growing up, the shofar is one of the most memorable parts of the service, right? It's one of the things that, that really makes it feel like Rosh Hashanah. And I think very much about, the family I was standing next to and the sound that I hear and the person blowing the shofar, all become parts of the memory for me as I think about Rosh Hashanah. And I'm just curious, too, to dig a little deeper in this idea of zichron trua. What is that connection between memory and the sound of the shofar? When you hear the sound of the shofar, what memories does it evoke for you? Yeah, Alvin, go ahead.
I think Jerry will appreciate this, probably the most of everybody on the group, and that is when we grew up at TBS, the shofar blower that we had was Milt Ruttenberg, who was an excellent shofar blower. And of course, like you just said, while I was in junior congregation during the main Torah service, I was back in the main sanctuary for the ending blowing, the Musaf blowing. So I got to hear him every year. And so I do have the same memories of where my parents would sit and who was sitting around them and being there with my parents at that point in the service. So it does bring back those memories for sure.
Good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I still remember the sound of Milt's shofar. He was also a musician. He was an oboe player, and he was extremely skilled. And in fact, when I started learning how to blow, I never spoke with him. I to this day I don't know why, because we were actually backdoor neighbors growing up. But I never spoke with him about it, which was foolish on my part. But I patterned a lot of what I do based on what I remembered. At the time, it was not that far removed. He had just retired. In fact, that's why there was a spot for me in the service, because we ran 2 services back in those years. But yeah, but I still remember the sound in my mind. I always will.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
Well, yeah.
Anybody else like to share any memories they have of the shofar, shofar blowers, the meaning of that sound, how that connects to memory for you?
Dennis has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Dennis. There you are.
It's hot out.
I grew up in Brooklyn in an area that had 3 or 4 synagogues that were very close proximity. And as a kid, before I went to services, a group of us used to go from shul to shul, and the timing was such we had figured out the timing so we can hear the shofar multiple times. Just run shul A, and we knew we had 2 minutes to get to shul B, and we had it down to a science. And that's my earliest remember of the shofar blowing as a kid. You know, years later, of course, you know, it had more significance, but then it was pretty exciting.
Some things never change, Dennis, going from shul to shul.
Yeah, I'm saying the same thing. This is like it was training for your minion hopping now.
Exactly.
One minion to another. And now we know where it all came from. Wow. I've learned a lot tonight already. We're barely scratched the surface. Good. No, thank you for sharing that. Excellent. So I think, you know, I hope we all have some memories of the shofar, and if not from childhood, then from more recent years, that'll help us think about the sound of the shofar this year. And of course, the shofar call is something that, you know, has meaning, not only our personal meaning that we have to it, but it's something that, as we say in the readings around the sounding of the shofar, you know, it's a sound to wake us up, kind of spiritual alarm clock to do tshuva. It's a call for justice. It's a call to help us, to help motivate us and to think about this primal sound that makes us think more deeply about who we are and what we try to be. So let's talk a little more about that sound. And to do that, I want to take a look at the Mishnah from Rosh Hashanah. We have that as the next text on the sheet here. And we broke this Mishnah in half. The first half, I think, is particularly you know, an issue for this year, or one of the issues for this year. So if you take a look at that Mishnah, it says, one who blows, that being blowing a shofar, blows a shofar into a pit or to a cistern or to a jug, right? A cistern that big, anyone who's been to Israel, right, have seen in the ground these big cisterns, plastered kind of caves that collect water. One who blows a shofar into a pit or a cistern or a jug, if he heard the sound of the shofar, he fulfilled his obligation. But if he hears the echo, he has not fulfilled his obligation, right? So you see what it's saying? It's saying if you hear the shofar straight from the shofar's mouth, as it were, you know, then you did the mitzvah of hearing the shofar. But if you heard the echo of the shofar, not direct from the shofar, then you haven't done the mitzvah. So first of all, why is that? Why would an echo not fulfill the mitzvah of shofar?
Because it's not the original.
I heard somebody say, what, is that Evie? Was that you?
No, it was Candy.
Oh, it's Candy. Candy, what did you say?
Here.
Because it's not the actual sound, it's a reproduction of the sound, but you're not actually hearing the sound directly.
Okay, good, right? So it's a reproduction. And why would that be a big deal? What's the problem with that?
Um, I'm gonna have to work on that one for a while.
It's okay. We can open it up. You can phone a friend. What's wrong with that?
Well,
Yeah,
I
Eric,
think
I see a hand up in your house. I don't. Benjamin?
Maybe it's because it's not the exact sound of it. It might just be like a repeat.
Great, right? It's not exactly the exact sound of the shofar. It might just be a repeat of it, or maybe you could get confused about it, but no, it's not exactly the same. You know, and anybody who's kind of worked in sound, you know that. I mean, I remember I went through a period of my life when I was younger that I used to trade tapes from certain bands, you know, the recordings of different concerts and shows for, you know, some Grateful Dead shows and some Fish shows and things like that. And the tapes that you would trade for, people would say they're Generation 1 or Generation 2 or Generation 3, meaning like it's, you know, whether the recording came from the soundboard or it came from, you know, a tape that was recorded off of another tape. Those who remember cassette tapes out there, right? And because each version you got that was further away from the original recording wasn't as good, right? Wasn't as authentic. You couldn't hear it quite as well. And I think it's a similar idea here with the shofar, right? The echo, maybe you can make out and know it's the shofar, but it's not the real sound, okay? So this, well before this year, there's debates that happen in the rabbinic community that wonders about what about hearing a shofar through a microphone, for example, right? Or through some sort of phone connection or video connection. Would that fulfill the obligation of shofar? And actually, the answer that's given most commonly, though not exclusively, is no, right? You need to hear it from the actual shofar, which is why, in shul, when we sound the shofar, we tilt the microphone away from the shofar blower, right? Because we want that sound to not go through the microphone system, but rather to go, from the shofar blower and the shofar itself. So this has raised kind of an obvious question for this year, when so many synagogues are doing virtual services and people be hearing shofar over the computer. Does that really fulfill the mitzvah of shofar? And actually, there is and the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards Conservative Movement dealt with this question. The first thing we try to do is hear the actual shofar, which you can do by getting your own shofar and working on it, or hopefully coming to Tashlich that afternoon of Rosh Hashanah and hearing the shofar in person there, God willing. But interestingly, there's one opinion by a rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer Weinberg, who was the chief rabbi of Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center in Israel, in Jerusalem for many years, an Orthodox rabbi, who was asked a question: if a patient in the hospital who can't leave his or her bed, if they could hear the shofar and other prayers over the phone, right? And would that fulfill their obligation? Because they can't go there and they're a contagious patient, someone couldn't come to their hospital room, right? If the only way they could hear shofar and they're too weak to blow it themselves is over some sort of phone connection, would that count for their mitzvah shofar? And Rabbi Weinberg actually says yes. He says in that case, when no one's able to go into the room because of contagion or whatever, or that person's not able to blow for themselves, that they could fulfill their obligation that way. So that's something that we're relying on this year because we're all in some ways cooped up and not able to be together. And of course, we know too that the shofar itself, as we've been cautioned many times, is something that can really be a super spreader of germs, right? The way that you blow shofar, expels all sorts of germs. And so we've been told to be particularly careful with where and how we blow shofar. We'll get to that in a little bit. Doing it over video and hearing over video is in some ways the best we can do this year. So we'll count for that mitzvah. But if you are able to do it yourself or to go to Tashlich, then that would be a good thing to do. I want to keep moving forward here because we got to get to the how-tos of shofar. It'll always take a little longer than I think. So let's continue with this Mishnah. So the Mishnah goes on and it says, and also one who was passing behind a synagogue, or if his house was next to the synagogue and he heard the sound of the shofar or that of the Megillah, right, this being for Purim, if he directed his heart, had intention, then he has fulfilled his obligation. But if he has not fulfilled his obligation, let me read that again. If someone's passing behind a synagogue or his house was next to a synagogue and he heard the sound of the shofar or the Megillah being read, if he directed his heart, had intention, then he has fulfilled his obligation. But if not, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Even though this one heard and this one heard, this one directed his heart and this one did not. What this is saying with kind of complicated language is basically to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar is not only about hearing the sound, it's also having the kavanah, the intention, the focus on the meaning of the sound too. So even if you're walking by a synagogue in Brooklyn like Dennis used to do, right, and you hear the shofar from another synagogue, you can't be like, all right, great, I did my mitzvah shofar. I hear that shofar in a distance. What this mitzvah is saying is you'd have to stop and really think about, I'm hearing the shofar for a mitzvah, and think about that meaning of the shofar in order to do the mitzvah. And what this Mishnah teaches us, what this teaching teaches us, is the importance of kavanah in sounding the shofar, right? The importance of having intention, of really thinking about and concentrating on what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the meaning of the sound of the shofar is. So to talk a little more about that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex, who's going to talk a bit about the kavanah that he has and that he thinks about when he prepares to blow shofar. He's going to show us a few shofarot and also then talk about the notes a little bit. So Alex, over to you.
All right. Thank you.
Take
All right,
off.
so can you hear me? I changed my microphone, so.
Yeah, no, we're good. I just took off the screen share and you are spotlighted.
Oh, awesome, thank you. So it's great to be with everyone tonight, and I see some of our expert shofar blowers that have been blowing shofar with me throughout the whole month of Elul. But when I blow the shofar, I think about a couple of different things. And one of my favorite things to think about is that a shofar and the notes of a shofar are like a nigun. A nigun is a song without words. And a nigun, the beauty of a nigun is it fills in the space where words can't. And I think the shofar does that as well. It expresses our emotions, or it can express our emotions where words fail us. We say a lot of words, a lot of prayers on Rosh Hashanah, but sometimes it's just not enough. And the shofar helps us continue that. And Rav Nachman described the sounds of the shofar as having the capacity, the ability to break evil in the world, to destroy evil in the world. But it also has the capacity to create more evil in the world. And it's how we hear the shofar and what we do with it. So that's kind of what I think about. And I will say, having had a lot of our young shofar blowers now blow shofar in our services, what I think about now is I think about them when I blow the shofar and how they are helping us fulfill this mitzvah of lishmoa kol shofar, that it's not a mitzvah to blow the shofar, it's really that mitzvah of hearing the shofar and how incredibly powerful and important it is to help others fulfill that mitzvah. So that is what I'm thinking about when I'm blowing the shofar. And I really would encourage you when you're blowing the shofar, and hopefully you will get shofarot at home, is to really pause and think about that, about how we get to help others fulfill a mitzvah. And there's very few times in our tradition where we really get to have that opportunity, where we are doing something specifically so someone else can fulfill a mitzvah. So I want to show just a couple of different shofarot. Rabbi, I wanted to start with, being on brand. So, this is the shofar. This is one of my favorite shofarot because it's easy, but it's wearing a mask. And if you are blowing a shofar in public this year around other people, I really encourage you, and if you're around us at TBS, you will need to have a mask on your shofar. So this is one that Steve Bornstein got for me. It's kind of like a silencer on it. It makes it a little quieter. But this is one shofar. This is a shofar that I got down in Baltimore. It's a ram's horn, and mercifully it was made to be really easy to blow. And I'm just going to show two other shofarot, and then maybe we could practice for a second and then practice blowing the shofar. I see some of us have shofarot there and we can talk about it. This is from an ayal, which of course is a unicorn. It's an ibex and it's a temani shofar. And you can see that there are different traditions for shofarot with a square mouthpiece or a round mouthpiece. Most of the shofarots that you'll get have a round mouthpiece. And if you're looking for a shofar, you really want to find one that has a round symmetrical mouthpiece like this, because it's much, much easier to blow. And this obviously is another ram's horn as well. So how to blow the shofar. There are different schools of thought. I'm going to show everybody the easy version, because there really are two schools of thought. But one thing to think about while we're practicing blowing the shofar is it's not meant to be easy. Tshuva is not meant to be easy. It's not meant to be a layup. You have to work at it. And blowing shofar is the same deal. It takes practice. It takes focus. It takes repetition. That's why we blow the shofar every day in Elul, except on Shabbat. So what you're going to do, we're going to practice first. So the way I show everybody how to blow the shofar is you take your finger like this, and you're going to put it up to your mouth, and you're just going to make a zerbert, just like that. And the noise from the shofar Kira, I didn't see a zerbert happening there. I'm just saying, it's okay. But the noise from the shofar is that zerbert, that vibration going through the shofar. And the longer it goes through the shofar, the more vibration you'll get, the louder it will be. There are 3 notes in that we blow, and no, Rabbi Peltz is going to be talking about them in a minute. But they all are equal time. They're just different beats. So a tekiah is 1 note. Toot. Now there are people who like to get a little fancy and go toot. But the most traditional version of a tekiah is toot, just that length right there. Shvarim, which is that broken note, that broken in 3 note, is the same time as the 1 tekiah. So toot, 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 same amount of notes. So it'd be, you could try it. You're all on mute, so I won't hear you anyway. Alvin did not try. I'm just saying, Rabbi, Alvin is looking at me. There he goes. Okay. I just want to make sure that we got everybody. Alvin's now participating. Good. All right. Now, the final note, the truah, is 7 to 9 little broken notes. But again, the same distance, the same amount of time as the tekiah. Now, the secret to blowing the truah is if you try and go like this, it's going to sound just like that, and it's not going to sound like a truah. You really need to go to blow it, and it'll sound like this. So it's do, 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 but again, the same amount of time. So, Rabbi, I'll blow the notes. I see some of us have shofarot here. I don't know if you want to hear from the audience at this point, but I'll blow a couple of shofarot and to hear the different sounds. You'll notice, by the way, and this is, it's funny, Rabbi Peltz, you're talking about the shofar notes and hearing them and the microphone. And one of the things I've discovered on Zoom is my mic is up here by my mouth. And I put it really close to the camera thinking that it's going to be super loud, but it's over here. And you'll hear how quiet the shofar is on the screen, but it's because it's not going all the way through the microphone. So here are the different notes. The first is tekiah.
Alex, really quick, we have one question. Julie asked, are you breaking the airflow with your lips or with your tongue?
My lips and my tongue, both.
Okay, good. So I think
let's think about it.
Yeah, let's listen to Alex do it, and you can try it at home. And then if anybody would like to volunteer to try it for us here, we can try that too. Okay.
Well, yeah, I'll sound a couple of different shofar because they're really going to sound very different.
Good.
So that's the ram horn. Now, this one typically is the ibeck because it's straight. And again, there are different midrashim about the shofar, how the shofar is shaped like a question mark. It asks a question. But the more curves a shofar has, the different sound it's going to have. But also, it kind of quiets the shofar in many ways. This being a straight shofar is quite loud. And some of my friends who have heard this already know that this is quite loud. So you might want to turn down your speakers. You've been warned. So you can hear the different sound with this. This one is a little harder to blow, but it is quite loud. And the final one I'll blow before I turn it back over to you, Rabbi Peltz, so I can catch my breath for a second, is this shofar. And this shofar, again, is another type of ram horn. And I know we have a couple of people on the screen over here who have different ones. You could also hold them up. They look, some of them, I see some up in the corner. Is that Dennis over there? They have different shofar out. But again, It's the same process of blowing the shofar, and the notes should be the same. Doot, 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 doot. So the last thing before I turn it back over to you, Rabbi, is just the Tekiah Gedola. And the Tekiah Gedola obviously is that last blast that we do at the end of Ne'ilah, at the end of the different shofar services that we do and the shofar blowing. And the trick to the Tekiah Gedola is to not try and blow it as loud as you can, but as long as you can. So this shofar, for example, I should be able to blow, I'm not going to do it right now because it gets kind of boring on Zoom, I found, but you should be able to blow Tekiah Gedola for about a minute, between 45 seconds to a minute. But that's because you're blowing kind of, slow, but not as loud as you can. So it does get kind of boring on Zoom, but you get the idea. I never actually saw how red I...
Keep going.
Oh, thanks. You'll have to run over here and pick me up. But never knew quite how red I turned until I was on camera blowing the shofar all the time. But I'll turn it back over to you, Rabbi. I'm going to drink some water.
Before we go back and look at a few texts, I see a couple of hands. Let's take a couple of questions. Benjamin, I see you have your hand up. And unmute yourself. And Alana, too. Good question. Yes.
The horn that I'm holding, and this is not from a ram. It is from an animal in Africa called a kudu.
From a kudu?
It has like this S-shaped sort of horn coming out of its head.
Wow.
So you
Where'd you find that one? Amazon?
Antelope.
Where'd you get that shofar?
Daddy got it in his
Dad.
Got it in Israel.
Dad got it in Israel.
All right.
Well, most shofarot are made from kosher animals, but that's one I haven't heard of.
Nobody knows of it.
No.
All right. Well, thanks, Benjamin, for sharing that. Good. Anyone else have any other questions about the mechanics of shofar blowing or tips of the trade? No? So
Rabbi, I have a question for you. Well,
yes.
About blowing shofar. So why are people putting a talit over their head while blowing the shofar?
Well, I actually, can I put Jerry on the spot for that one? Jerry Siegel, you're, Jerry's with us right now. Jerry? Okay.
Sorry, I was interrupted for a sec. Real life here. I
was just saying. Alex asked about the tradition of putting a talis over your head when you sound the shofar, and Jerry, of course, has been a longtime shofar blower at TBS, and you do that, Jerry, right? You cover your head with it. So why do you do that? How does that help you sound the shofar?
Well, it's more. I think it's sort of similar to why many Orthodox people daven the Amida with their talisim over their heads, and that's using it almost as a curtain to separate myself. It helps me focus on what I'm doing. I don't want to, even though there's 1,800 people in front of me in my line of vision, I don't want to think about that. I'm focusing on sounding the notes having the kavanah that you mentioned. And actually, I remember Rabbi Lewis also used to put his tallis over his head. It's the only time he did that was when he and Milt Ruttenberg were doing it. Both of them did that. That was the practice. The first time I saw someone blowing shofar without a tallis over their heads, it looked very peculiar to me. But I think it's a way of helping me focus on the moment and what I'm doing, and closing off the distractions that might be around me, like why we cover our eyes when we say Shema. Same idea, so you don't get distracted by someone walking by or even coming up to greet you. That's the only time you're not supposed to greet someone.
Yeah.
So.
Good. Yeah, Alvin, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think there's also the other side of that, and that is for us, the listeners. We are supposed to focus not on the person blowing, no offense, Jerry, but on the sound. And it's the bracha is lishmoa kol shofar, to hear it. So we don't even have to look at the blower, and the tallis in a way hides the blower himself from us, and we really are focusing on the sound coming out of the shofar. In a sense, if you glance over at the shofar blower in the rabbi, you see just the shofar sticking out, not even the face. It's covered by the tallis, so or partially. So I think that's the other side of it, not just the kavanah from the blower, but the kavanah for the listeners to pay attention to the sound.
Yeah. In fact, recall the bracha lishmoa. I'm the one who says that. I'm not the one who's supposed to think about. I mean, the mitzvah isn't for me to blow it. It's for me to hear it, and obviously for everybody else to hear it. Just sort of amplifying what Alvin was talking about there, but
but not amplifying too much, so it's straight from your voice, so we can.
Right. Well, you don't want excessive feedback.
Good. So I think Alvin and Jerry covered it well for us, right? And we're going to talk about that bracha in a moment here, but. Again, it comes back to this idea of kavanah, right? Of really focus, right? Or intention when you hear that sound of the shofar. And as Jerry rightly pointed out, right, the mitzvah is to hear the shofar, not to blow the shofar, but to actually hear it. And even the person sounding the shofar fulfills their mitzvah by hearing and really listening to that sound. So let me just put our sheet back up here. And you'll see, right, we have right in the middle the words we say, right? We say the full bracha, brocha ta Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu v'tzivanu b'tzivanu. Say lishmoa kol shofar, right? Hearing the sound of the shofar. That's the mitzvah, is to hear it. And as we learned, hearing it doesn't just mean, oh, that's a shofar, cool, right? Like hearing it means that that we're really listening to it, right? Kind of a deep listening to it and thinking about the meaning of that shofar, thinking about what the shofar is calling us to do. Eric shared with us an article. We'll get to that in a minute. I want to also here point out, this is for more visual learners like myself, we have here on the sheet, like Alex was talking about, the length of the different notes that we blow. You'll see tikiyah, right, which is the one full blast, shvarim, the 3 broken notes, and trua, the 9 broken notes, are all the same length, right? I mean, meaning they're all blown for the same duration of time. They're just, one is whole, tikiyah, one is divided into 3, shvarim, and one is divided into 9, like trua. Then there's tikiyah gedola, which goes on for a longer amount of time, which marks as the tikiyah gedola. But otherwise, these notes themselves are supposed to be the same length, right? The same duration of time as we sound the shofar. Okay. Just glancing out if there are any questions before I keep going here. So I want to just point out another couple things about the notes. First of all, we're not going to go through this, but I mentioned this before. If you go to the website of the Rabbinical Assembly, there's all sorts of questions of Jewish law that come up this year when you're trying to do services in a way that is safe and distant and virtual, or minimize the amount of people and everything else. And one of the traditions on Rosh Hashanah is the 100 blasts of the shofar on each day. Now, of course, the exception is Shabbat, right? Like on the first day of this year, where you don't hear the shofar at all. But when it's not Shabbat, like on the second day of Rosh Hashanah this year, there's a custom to hear 100 blasts of the shofar itself, which we usually just about fulfill by the sets of 30 blasts we do. We do 30 blasts in the shofar service, 30 blasts in Musaf, right, in Malchuyot, Zichronon, and Shofar, those three sections of the Musaf service that each conclude with shofar blast 2. And then we do another 30 blasts at the, actually we do, we do 40 blasts at that point, right, Alvin? We do 40 blasts at that point at the end.
We do 40.
What, Jerry?
Yeah, we do 40 at the end. We do a full set of the Tekiah Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah, and then the last 10 are a single set sequence of each one. The Tekiah Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah, then Tekiah Shvarim, Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. So that's how you get to 100.
Exactly, and that's how you get to 100, right? As we normally do. Interestingly, in the Tshuva, Rabbi Rob Weinberg, is a rabbi in Hoboken, New Jersey, shows that the real halachic requirement, the minimum, the requirement from Torah is to hear 30, right? The 100 is a strong custom to hear on Rosh Hashanah. 30 is the minimum requirement. So if you are trying to blow the shofar at home or hearing it at home, and especially if you're a first-time shofar blower, don't pass out. And you have the whole day over the course of the day to do that. Sorry, I'm going to scroll down here. And I saw a hand pop up somewhere. There might have been a question on that. Let me just see. Where's the hand? Sheldon, did you have a question? Oops, sorry, unmute yourself. I hit you.
It's a comment, not a question.
Okay.
I listened to a lecture with someone who worked with Leonard Bernstein, the composer, and supposedly he said that the introduction to West Side Story, it says da-da, it is the shofar sounding. Tekiah.
Huh, interesting. Yeah,
that is absolutely
and he
true.
brought that out.
Yeah, Jerry, that's
He
true.
brought it out during the lecture.
Yeah, it's funny what some Jewish customs from different Jews' backgrounds make their way into Broadway or other areas too. Yeah, good. Thanks for sharing that, Sheldon. We want to take a look. I don't think we're going to read all of this, but these are just a couple of ideas that think about the meaning of the shofar. And we've talked so much about, the kavanah, right? The intention, the focus we have been reciting the shofar. You can think about what exactly does that focus mean, and certainly part of it's internal. But here we have from Rabbi Art Green and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs a couple of texts here that help us think about it. I go around and ask people to read, but I know it's a little tricky on Zoom, so I hope you're not getting too tired of hearing my voice reading. But let me read Rabbi Green's section first. And as he reads about what he's going to talk about is about how the meaning of the sound of the shofar and how and the whole notes and the broken notes of the shofar itself. So he writes, the shofar sound represents prayer beyond words, an intensity of longing that can be articulated only in a wordless shout, right? Which, that whole idea, I think, is a very powerful one. I mean, we know that our prayers are very wordy, right? Like we have a lot of words that we say over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, let alone on a regular Shabbat, right? And those words have come together over the centuries from a variety of sources and people and places and Torah and texts and Tanakh and all sorts of places that elicit feelings and connections to the past, and those words are important. But there are some things that go beyond words, right? That can't be easily articulated. And he says the shofar sound represents a prayer beyond words. And he goes on, but the order of the sounds, according to one old interpretation, contains the message in quite explicit terms. Each series of shofar blasts begins with tekiah, a whole sound. It is followed by shvarim, a tripartite sound, broken sound, whose very name means breakings, right? That's what shvarim means. I started off whole, the shofar speech says, and I became broken. Then follows a trua, a staccato series of blast fragments saying, I was entirely smashed to pieces. But each series has to end with a new tekiah, promising wholeness once more. Right. So what does that evoke for you? I mean, does that resonate with you? Rabbi Green is saying, thinking about this one interpretation of the shofar as we start with this whole note of tekiah, we have broken notes in the middle, and then a whole note at the end representing we start whole, we become broken in some ways, and we end whole as well. What does that mean for you as you think about that this year? Does that resonate with you? Yeah, Alvin?
Yeah, I think of part of the liturgy on Yom Kippur, where we say, with the halakhot section, or actually the Shamnu, that we are haughty and we think we're perfect and we're tzaddikim anachnu. But no, we've actually sinned. And I think this is part of that atonement process, to hear the shofar and say, oh, I come before God, I'm fine, I'm perfect, I did all this good stuff this year. But wait a minute, no, I really didn't. There are things that I did that are not so good. And if you let that get to you, you'll become very depressed and unable to continue in the new year. So you have to be restored to that sense of, okay, I may have some brokenness in me, but I can still become whole again. That's teshuvah in a sense. And that's, I think, the resonance that I get out of that.
Good, right? In a lot of ways, it sort of reflects this whole period of time that we're in Elul and the High Holy Days, right? The Yamim Noraim. That we start whole, and this is an opportunity. Over the course of the year, there are things that might test us or cause us, God forbid, sadness or sorrow or loneliness or suffering, little breakings or losses that happen, God forbid too. And the process of tshuva is an opportunity for us to try to get back to that wholeness. Good. Anybody else? Other thoughts on that? Okay, so let's just take a look then at Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of Britain, who writes something similar in thinking about the kind of the shofar as a prayer beyond words, but he gets a bit into what this evokes historically for us. So he writes, in Jewish history, the simple has tended to prevail over the sophisticated, for God seeks the unadorned heart. The very naturalness of the shofar gives it its power. The shofar is the wordless cry at the heart of a religion of words. Judaism is a profoundly verbal culture, a religion of bold text, impassioned conversation, and argument for the sake of heaven. Yet there is a time for emotions that lie too deep for words. The sound of the shofar breaks through the carapace outer shell of the self-justifying mind and touches us directly at the most primal level of our being. Right? This idea that the shofar is a very primal sound, right? It's not as sophisticated as a trumpet or a trombone or other types of instruments that, you can play different notes on it. I mean, yes, you can play different notes on the shofar, but you don't have any implements that help you do that. And of course, it's fashioned from an animal, right? And we know that the shofar, or the ram's horn, is something that, while is very important in Judaism, was also used in other ancient cultures as well. So it's this primal sound that comes that, in a way, gets to the primal level of our being, as Rabbi Sachs writes. Is that something that resonates with anybody here? That makes you think about your connection to the shofar? Yeah, Jerry?
Yeah. So one of the things I read quite a few years ago was that the shivarim and the trua are likened to the sound of crying, which is, on the one hand, it can express remorse for the sins that we have done in the previous year. Also, I mean, it's supposed to wake up our souls. So what wakes up your soul more or gets your attention more than the sound of crying? When someone's crying, you can cry, from happiness, but usually it's because someone's very sad. So the crying evokes the feeling of remorse And also there are times if someone wants to really, reform their ways, that kind of deep emotion that comes from the soul can evoke, crying can be reflective of strong emotion. So that's where this whole simile of the crying comes from. And that's actually some people who blow really go out of their way to make the sound evocative of crying.
Actually, it's actually in the Talmud, it compares the sound of the shofar to crying, and even more provocatively, and this could be a whole nother shiur in and of itself, even more provocatively, it shares, the example it gives is that it's the sound of crying of Sisera's mother. So who is Sisera and who is Sisera's mother? In the book of Judges, Barak and Deborah, Deborah, one of the judges and heroes of Israel, Barak, her commander, defeat the Canaanite army, the Philistine army of King Yavin. And King Yavin's general is Sisera. And Sisera is this evil general who's attacking the Israelites. And they, Deborah and Barak defeat him, and they kill him, right, in battle, this general of this Philistine general, Sisera. And the Bible reports that when Sisera's mother heard that her son, the general, was killed, she cries. The Talmud says the sound of the shofar reminds us of the cry of Sisera's mother, right? Which is just such a powerful idea, right? Here it is, an enemy of Israel who is trying to attack and kill the Israelites, not Jewish, of course, enemy of Israel. The shofar, one of our holiest of objects on Rosh Hashanah, is meant to remind us of his mother's cry at the news of her son's death. It's an incredibly powerful statement about compassion, I think, about tshuva, of about trying to, rise above some maybe serious but concerns there for the sake of humanity. And it's a very rich text that we find in the Talmud, but that's the kind of the